The Sound of Waves, Chapter 5. Until now, the boy had been leading a peaceful, contented existence, poor though he was, but from this time on he became tormented with unrest and lost in thought, falling prey to the feeling that there was nothing about him that could possibly appeal to Hatsue. He was so healthy that he had never had any sickness other than the measles. He could swim the circumference of Utajima as many as 5 times without stopping, and he was sure he would have to yield to no one in any test of physical strength. But he couldn't believe that any of these qualities could possibly touch Hatsue's heart. Another opportunity to meet Hatsue simply wouldn't come. Whenever he returned from fishing, he always looked all along the beach for her, but on the few occasions when he caught sight of her, she was busy working and there was no chance to speak. There was no such thing as that time when she had been alone, leaning against the abacuses and staring out to sea. Moreover, whenever the boy resolved that he was sick of it all and that he would put Hatsue completely out of his mind, on that very day he was sure to catch sight of her among the bustling crowd that gathered on the beach when the boats came in. City youths learn the ways of love early from novels, movies and the like, but on Utajima there were practically no models to follow. Thus, no matter how he wondered about it, Shinji hadn't the slightest idea what he should have done during those precious minutes between the observation tower and the lighthouse when he'd been alone with her. He was left with nothing but a keen sense of regret, a feeling that there was something he had utterly failed to do. It was the monthly commemoration of the day of his father's death, and the whole family was going to visit the grave as they did every month. Not to interfere with Shinji's work, they had chosen a time before the boat set out and before his brother's school. Shinji and his brother came out of the house with their mother, who was carrying incense sticks and grave flowers. They left the house standing open. There was no such thing as theft on the island. The graveyard was located some distance from the village, on a low cliff above the beach. At high tide, the sea came right up to the foot of the cliff. The uneven slope was covered with gravestones, some of them tilting on the soft sand foundation. Dawn hadn't yet broken. The sky was just beginning to become light in the direction of the lighthouse, but the village and its harbour, which faced northwest, still remained in night. Shinji walked in front carrying a paper lantern. Hiroshi, his brother, was still rubbing the sleep out of his eyes when he pulled on his mother's sleeve and said, "Can I have 4 rice dumplings in my lunch today?" "Can I, huh? Such foolishness. 2 you'll get. 3'd be more than give you the bellyache." "Please, I want 4. The rice dumplings they made on the island to celebrate the Day of the Monkey, or on the death memorial days, were almost as large as the small pillows they slept on. In the graveyard, a cold morning breeze was blowing fitfully. The surface of the sea in the lee of the island was black, but the offing was stained with dawn. The mountains enclosing the Gulf of Eyes could be seen clearly. In the pale light of daybreak, the gravestones looked like so many white sails of boats anchored in a busy harbour. They were sails that would never again be filled with wind, sails that, too long unused and heavily drooping, had been turned into stone just as they were. The boat's anchors had been thrust so deeply into the dark earth that they could never again be raised. Reaching their father's grave, their mother arranged the flowers she had brought, and, after striking many matches only to have them blown out by the wind, finally succeeded in lighting the incense. Then she had her sons bow before the grave, while she herself bowed behind them, weeping. In their village there was a saying, "Never have aboard 1 woman or 1 priest." The boat on which Shinji's father died had broken this taboo. An old woman had died on the island toward the end of the war, and the cooperative's boat had set out to take her body to Toshijima for the autopsy. When the boat was about 3 miles out from Utajima, it was sighted by a plane from an aircraft carrier. The boat's regular engineer was not aboard, and his substitute was unaccustomed to the engine. It was the black smoke from his sluggish engine that had given the plane its target. The plane dropped a bomb on the boat and then strafed it with machine gun fire. The boat's funnel was split open and Shinji's father had his head torn apart down to his ears. Another man too was killed instantly, hit in the eye. One was hit in the back by a bullet which entered his lungs. One was hit in the legs, and one who had a buttock shot away died shortly after of the bleeding. Both the deck and the bilge became a lake of blood. The fuel tank was hit and kerosene spread on top of the blood. Some hesitated to fling themselves prone in this mess and were hit in the hips. 4 persons saved themselves by taking shelter in the icebox in the forward cabin. In his panic, one man squeezed himself through the porthole behind the bridge, but when he tried to repeat the feat back in port, he found that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't wriggle through the tiny opening a second time. Thus, of 11 persons, 3 were killed and a number wounded, but the corpse of the old woman, stretched out on the deck under a rush mat, wasn't so much as touched by a single bullet. The old man was really something fierce when fishing for sand lance, Shinji said reminiscently to his mother. He'd beat me every day. Really, there wasn't time for the welts to go down before he'd raise more. Sand lance were found in the Yohiro shallows, and catching them required unusual skill. A flexible bamboo pole with feathers on the tip was used to imitate a seabird pursuing a fish under the water, and the operation called for split-second timing. Well, I guess so, said his mother. Sand lance fishing is real man's work, even for a fisherman. Hiroshi took no interest in the talk between his mother and brother, but was dreaming of the school excursion that was to take place in only 10 days more. Shinji had been too poor to go on school excursions when he was Hiroshi's age, so he had been saving money out of his own wages for Hiroshi's travel expenses. When they had finished paying their homage at the graveside, Shinji went on alone directly to the beach to help with the preparations for sailing. It was agreed that his mother would return home and bring him his lunch before the boats put out. As he hurried toward the Tahai Maru along the busy beach, someone's voice from out of the throng came to him on the wind and struck his ears. They say, Yasuo Kawamoto's to marry Hatsue. At the sound of these words, Shinji's spirits became pitch black. Again, the Tahai Maru spent the day octopus fishing. During the 11 hours they were out in the boat, Shinji threw his whole soul into the fishing and scarcely once opened his mouth. But as he usually had very little to say, his silence wasn't particularly noticeable. Returning to harbour, they tied up as usual to the cooperative's boat and unloaded their octopus. Then the other fish were sold through a middleman and transferred to the buyer's ship, belonging to a private wholesale fish dealer. The gilt heads were flapping about inside the metal baskets used for weighing fish, flashing in the light of the setting sun. It was the day out of every 10 when the fishermen were paid, so Shinji and Ryuji went along with the master to the office of the cooperative. Their catch for the 10-day period had been over £330, and they cleared 27,997 yen after deducting the cooperative sales commission, the 10% savings deposit, and maintenance costs. Shinji received 4,000 yen from the master as his share. It had been a good take, considering that the height of the fishing season was already past. Licking his fingers, the boy carefully counted the bills in his big, rough hands. Then he returned them to the envelope with his name on it and put it deep in the bottom of the inner pocket of his jumper. With a bow toward the master, he left the office. The master had drawn up to the brazier with the head of the cooperative and was proudly exhibiting a cigarette holder he had carved himself out of a piece of coral. The boy had intended to go straight home, but somehow his feet took him of their own accord back to the darkening beach. The last boat was just being pulled up onto the sand. There were only a few men to turn the winch and to help it along by pulling on the rope, so the women, who usually only placed the abacus frames under the keel, were pushing from behind. It was obvious that no headway was being made. The beach was growing dark and no trace was to be seen of the grammar school boys who usually came out to help. Shinji decided to lend a hand. Just at that moment, one of the women pushing the boat raised her head and looked in Shinji's direction. It was Hatsue. He had no wish to see the face of this girl who had put him in such a black mood all day, but his feet carried him on to the boat. Her face was glowing in the semi-darkness. He He could see her forehead moist with sweat, her rosy cheeks, her dark, flashing eyes fixed again steadily in the direction the boat was being pushed. Without a word, Shinji took hold of the rope. The men at the winch called out, "Much obliged." Shinji's arms were powerful. In an instant the boat was sliding up over the sand and the women were running helter-skelter after it with their abacus frames. Once the boat was beached, Shinji turned and walked off toward home, not once looking back. He wanted terribly to turn around, but smothered the impulse. Opening the sliding door of his house, under the dim lamp, Shinji saw the familiar expanse of straw mats, turned reddish-brown with age and use. His brother was lying on his stomach reading, holding a textbook out under the light. His mother was busy at the cook stove. Without taking off his rubber boots, Shinji lay back face up, the upper half of his body on the straw mats, and his feet still in the tiny entry. "Welcome back," said his mother. Shinji liked to hand his pay envelope to his mother without saying anything, and, being a mother, she understood and always pretended to have forgotten that this was the 10th day, payday. She knew how much her son liked to see her look surprised. Shinji ran his hand into the inner pocket of his jumper. The money wasn't there. He searched the pocket on the other side. He searched his trouser pockets. He even ran his hands down inside his trousers. Surely he must have dropped it on the beach. Without a word, he ran out of the house. Shortly after Shinji had left, someone came calling in front of the house. Shinji's mother went to the entry and found a young girl standing in the darkness of the alleyway. "Shinji-san, is he at home? He came home just a bit ago, but then he went out again. I found this on the beach, and since Shinji-san's name was written on it." "Well now, that's truly kind of you. Shinji must have gone to look for it. Shall I go tell him?" "Oh, would you? Much obliged, much obliged." The beach was now completely dark. The meagre lights of Toshijima and Sugashijima were glinting from across the sea. Fast asleep in the starlight, many fishing boats were lined up, facing domineeringly out to sea. Hatsue caught a glimpse of Shinji's shadow, but at that instant he disappeared behind a boat. He was stooping over, searching the sand, and apparently hadn't seen Hatsue. She came upon him face to face in the shadow of a boat, standing stock still in a rage. Hatsue told him what had happened, and that she had come to tell him his money was already safely in his mother's hands. She went on to explain that she had had to ask 2 or 3 people the way to Shinji's house, but had always satisfied their curiosity by showing them the envelope she had found with Shinji's name on it. The boy gave a sigh of relief. He smiled, his white teeth flashing handsomely in the darkness. The girl had come in a hurry and her breasts were rising and falling rapidly. Shinji was reminded of opulent dark blue waves on the open sea. All the day's torment disappeared and his spirits revived within him. "I hear you're going to marry Yasuo Kawamoto. Is it true?" The words rushed out of the boy's mouth. The girl burst out laughing. Her laughter gradually increased until she was choking with it. Shinji wanted to stop her, but he didn't know how. He put his hand on her shoulder. His touch was light, but Hatsue dropped to the sand, still laughing. "What's the matter? What's the matter?" Shinji squatted down beside her and shook her by the shoulders. At last the girl's laughter abated and she looked seriously into the boy's face. Then she broke into laughter again. Shinji stuck out his face towards hers and asked, "Is it true?" "Silly, it's a big lie." "But that's what they're saying, all right." "It's a big lie." The two had clasped their knees and were sitting in the shadow of the boat. "Oh, I hurt. I've laughed so much that I hurt. Right here," the girl said, putting her hand over her breast. The stripes of her faded work clothes were moving and shifting where they crossed her breasts. "This is where it hurts," Hatsue said again. "Are you all right?" And without thinking, Shinji put his own hand on the spot. "When you press it, it feels a little better," the girl said. And suddenly Shinji's breast too was moving fast. Their cheeks came so close they were almost touching. They could plainly smell each other, It was a fragrance like that of salt water. They could feel each other's warmth. Their dry, chapped lips touched. There was a slight taste of salt. It's like seaweed, Shinji thought. Then the moment was past. The boy moved away and stood up, propelled by a feeling of guilt at this first experience in his life. Tomorrow I'm going to take some fish to the lighthouse keeper's place when I come back from fishing. Still looking out to sea, Shinji had now recovered his dignity and could make this declaration in a manly voice. I'm going there too tomorrow afternoon, the girl replied, likewise looking out to sea. With that, the two parted and went walking away on opposite sides of the row of boats. Shinji was starting for home, but he noticed that the girl hadn't appeared from behind the boats. Just then he saw her shadow cast on the sand from behind the last boat and knew she was hiding there. "Your shadow's giving you away," he called out. Suddenly, the figure of a girl dressed in wide striped work clothes came darting out, like some wild animal, and went running at full speed across the beach, never looking back.